In the intricate dance of international relations, moments of peculiar confluence can arise, hinting at deeper currents beneath the surface. When the ability to critically report on these events is simultaneously curtailed, the public discourse becomes shadowed by unanswered questions. Such a situation appears to be unfolding between the United States and Venezuela, characterized by a series of unusual developments that, when viewed collectively, paint a disquieting picture. This narrative explores recent policy shifts, unexplained resignations, curious military communications, and symbolic gestures, all suggesting a potentially significant, yet obscured, shift in geopolitical strategy. A critical first element in this unfolding narrative is the recent policy adjustment by the Department of Defense concerning the Pentagon press corps. In an unprecedented move, the department has revoked the press credentials of numerous news outlets, effectively barring them from reporting within the Pentagon. The revised policy stipulates that any statement, classified or unclassified, gathered from a military officer that has not been pre-approved for release by the Secretary of Defense, would be considered a criminal offense by the reporting entity. This policy directly challenges the foundational principles of press freedom enshrined in many democratic constitutions, including that of the United States. Numerous legal precedents affirm the press's fundamental right to report on government operations, especially those funded by taxpayers, making the presence of journalists in such institutions a constitutional imperative rather than a courtesy. Unsurprisingly, this draconian shift led to the departure of most major news organizations from the Pentagon, leaving only a handful of outlets and a few freelancers willing to operate under these new restrictions. The timing of this severe curtailment of press freedom raises immediate suspicions, coinciding as it does with other contentious developments. One such development is the acknowledgement by a former U.S. president that he authorized covert Central Intelligence Agency (CIA) operations within Venezuela. The very nature of covert operations makes their public disclosure unusual, particularly when discussed openly by a head of state. Furthermore, this admission was accompanied by the statement that land operations in Venezuela were also being considered. This raises serious questions, as there has been no discernible or publicly articulated shift in the US-Venezuela relationship to warrant such aggressive posture. No major crisis or imminent threat has been presented to justify these considerations. The official justifications for this intensified focus on Venezuela remain largely unsubstantiated by publicly available intelligence. One primary claim centers on the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang, alleged to be a significant mover of illegal drugs into the United States. However, this assertion lacks compelling evidence. Official reports, such as those from the Drug Enforcement Administration, profiling prolific drug-producing nations, do not list Venezuela or the Tren de Aragua among the top threats. In fact, many maritime interdictions of vessels linked to the gang reveal their destinations to be other Caribbean nations, not directly the US, to suddenly elevate Venezuela above established drug-producing countries and cartels, or even major geopolitical adversaries, as the number one threat to national security, without clear evidence, challenges credibility. The Tren de Aragua's operations are more accurately described as a bribery scheme involving Venezuelan officials within a state experiencing significant governmental instability, rather than an organized direct assault on US drug markets. Another justification offered by the former president for intervention involved the unsubstantiated claim that Venezuela was deliberately emptying its prisons, sending convicted criminals to the United States disguised as migrants. This claim is largely contradicted by evidence on the ground. While anecdotal instances of individuals with criminal pasts among migrant populations are not impossible, the vast majority of Venezuelan migrants seeking asylum in the US are genuine political dissidents, individuals fleeing persecution, or those escaping dire economic and humanitarian conditions. These are often people who have been detained, beaten, or threatened for opposing the Venezuelan government, and their flight to the US is a search for safety and freedom, not part of a state-sponsored criminal export program. Characterizing these vulnerable individuals as an invading force of criminals misrepresents their plight and the true nature of their exodus. Adding to the complexity, the Venezuelan government itself recently proposed a plan for a gradual, managed transition of power, including the departure of the current leader and the potential for future elections after a transitional period. This proposal, which could have offered a diplomatic pathway to regime change, allegedly a US policy goal, was reportedly rejected outright by the White House. The rejection was based on a questioning of the legitimacy of the current Venezuelan government and accusations of its operation as a narco-terrorist state. This refusal to engage with a potential diplomatic resolution, even one that aligns with stated U.S. objectives, suggests a deeper, perhaps more aggressive, agenda at play. It implies that the U.S. may already be committed to a particular course of action, irrespective of diplomatic openings. Further intensifying speculation is the abrupt resignation of a high-ranking U.S. Navy admiral, the head of U.S. Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, just 1 year into a typical 3-year term. This position is considered the pinnacle of a flag-grade officer's career, a competent command leadership role that often ensures a place in military history. For an officer to voluntarily step down from such a prestigious and hard-earned post prematurely is highly unusual and suggests extraordinary circumstances. A prominent congressional leader, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, publicly voiced his concern that this resignation deepened anxieties about the administration, ignoring the hard-earned lessons of previous U.S. military campaigns and the advice of our most experienced warfighters. The admiral's parting statement, emphasizing his honor in serving the nation and defending the Constitution for over 37 years, hints that his decision may have been driven by profound ethical or strategic disagreements, perhaps related to proposed actions that he felt contravened those very principles. In parallel to these public and high-level events, there have been unusual, subtle indications of potential military preparedness. For individuals who have served in the U.S. military and remain in the Individual Ready Reserve, a category of personnel who can be recalled in times of national crisis, there have been reports of an unprecedented surge in communications. Specifically, a pattern of frequent emails, often daily, from Army Reserve headquarters, demanding updates to contact information and fitness to serve status. Such communications, typically infrequent, becoming hourly or daily, suggest a deliberate and unusual effort to confirm the availability and readiness of a broader pool of personnel. This, deep digging, into manpower list points towards the possibility that military planners are preparing for a significant deployment or operational requirement, underscoring the gravity of the developing situation. Finally, a symbolic, yet highly significant, detail emerged. A former U.S. president was reportedly seen with a mock-up of a triumphal arch, intended for construction in Washington, D.C. While the construction of monuments is common, a triumphal arch carries a very specific historical and architectural meaning. Dating back to Roman times, these arches were erected exclusively to commemorate a general's or emperor's decisive victory in war, often through a successful military campaign. Iconic examples abound: the Arch of Titus commemorating a victory in Judea, Napoleon's Arc de Triomphe celebrating European conquests, or the Wellington Arch marking British victories in the Napoleonic Wars. The historical precedent is unequivocally clear: triumphal arches celebrate military triumph. To propose such a monument, ostensibly to celebrate America's 250th anniversary, yet before any major conflict or declared victory, introduces a highly suggestive element into this complex tapestry of events. It raises the question of whether such a monument is being considered in anticipation of a future military success. When considered together, these disparate events, the severe restriction of press access to the Pentagon, the public acknowledgement of covert operations and potential land incursions into Venezuela despite questionable justifications, the rejection of diplomatic solutions, the unusual resignation of a senior military commander, peculiar military personnel recall efforts, and the symbolic contemplation of a triumphal arch, form a disquieting pattern. They suggest a deliberate, yet largely opaque, escalation of U.S. posture towards Venezuela, operating under conditions of reduced public scrutiny. The absence of clear, compelling public justification for such moves, coupled with efforts to limit independent reporting, underscores the critical need for greater transparency and open dialogue. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance in observing the subtle shifts in national and international policy, especially when official narratives appear to diverge from the observable facts on the ground.